Hi everyone, and welcome to Protocol 36. And in today's video we'll be covering the Spider-Man comics that inspired Spider-Man 3, continuing the video series leading up to the release of Spider-Man No Way Home, where we'll be looking at the Spider-Man comics that the filmmakers used when making those films, like the overall story, character moments, visual references, and more. Again, I'm not going to be talking about how well they adapted those stories and moments on the big screen, just looking at the specific comics that were used, as this video series is more so a celebration for both the films and the comic books that started it all. So before we get started, if at any point you enjoyed this video, I really appreciate if you could drop a like, as that would really help out the channel. Thank you. Now, let's get started. So as many fans, including myself, pointed out years ago that some of the biggest comics that influenced Spider-Man 3 into the movie that we know today are of course the Amazing Spider-Man issue 4, the Amazing Spider-Man issue 136, and of course the Amazing Spider-Man issue 300. There are of course other books and even a show that inspired its creation, and we'll be mentioning later on in the video. But starting off with the Amazing Spider-Man issue 136, it was clear that Harry becoming the next Green Goblin was always planned, especially after Spider-Man 2. So it would make a lot of sense to take that story and borrow a lot of elements from that issue, which was of course the comic where Harry Osborn officially becomes the Green Goblin. And after he finds out that Peter is Spider-Man, he straight away goes to get revenge for his father's death, which also happens in the first portion of the film, Harry using the opportunity to kill Peter off guard in his civilian clothes. After Peter beats Harry, he gets a serious blow to the head, causing him to lose his recent memories. Now, even though that didn't really happen in the original books, it did happen to his father Norman a lot, especially the first time in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 40, which we also mentioned in the Spider-Man 1 video. Earlier in the film, when he walks out the chamber filled with the Goblin formula, which something similar also happened towards the ending of the Spectacular Spider-Man issue 188. In the Amazing Spider-Man issue 137, Harry tries to attack Peter personally by kidnapping Flash Thompson, Mary Jane, and Aunt May, each having a bomb attached to them, making Peter guess which one is the real one, or they will die. Now, even though Harry doesn't really pull something like that in the film, he does attack Peter personally by forcing Mary Jane to break up with him, otherwise he would threaten to kill him, therefore making Peter feel alone and broken. In the comics, Harry was also responsible creating life model decoys of Peter's parents in order to get to his head, which was pretty messed up, to be honest. When it comes to Spider-Man and his comic book roots, the film pretty much took his origin story right from the page of the Amazing Spider-Man issue 4, where he was exposed to radiation from a nuclear test explosion after he escaped from jail, giving him his iconic sound powers, which the exact same thing happens in the film. Of course, instead of it being a nuclear explosion that turned him into the Sandman, it was a particle incinerator that was tested. When Sandman and Spider-Man fought in that issue, Peter punches him through the chest, which we'll also see the iconic shot of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man punching through Sandman's stomach in Spider-Man 3, which of course was an intentional nod to the Stan Lee and Steve Ditko comics. When it comes to Spider-Man getting the black suit, he originally got the alien costume in the Secret Wars comic book event. While that's not the way he got it in the film, for obvious reasons, it was pretty similar to how he got it in the 90s series, when both versions of Peter were falling asleep and having nightmares of their own, which that moment was also taken from the comics. When he wakes up upside down at night with the costume on, this was another moment obviously taken from the 90s show. As mentioned in the Spider-Man 1 video, Avi Arad did work on that show, and is pretty much involved with all the Spider-Man films, one way or another, especially the original trilogy and the Amazing Spider-Man franchise, even the Venom solo films too. One other thing taken from the show was of course the symbiote amplifying the host's aggression, making them more violent and angry, which wasn't in the original comics, but was added onto the show, influencing other adaptations in the future. Later in the film, Peter also goes to Dr. Connors to look into the symbiote, which he also does in the animated series, while in the comics he goes to Reed Richards to look into it. And taking the symbiote off in the film was from the iconic moment in the Web of Spider-Man issue 1, which was also ripped from the page. When it comes to Eddie Brock, it's clear that he's more of a mixture of the 616 and Ultimate iterations of the character, as the Ultimate and Raimi versions are both younger than the 616 counterpart and are both named Edward Brock Jr., which isn't the case in the 616 universe, while also having a thing with Gwen Stacy, like he does in the Ultimate universe, though she's in high school while he was in college, which was pretty disturbing to say the least. He does have several things in common with the Eddie Brock in the 90s Spider-Man animated series 2, where he works for the Daily Bugle, like he does in Spider-Man 3, and in that adaptation he was both a photographer and a reporter, while in the film he was just a photographer, in order for Peter to have a rival in his personal life. But the similarities that he does share with his 616 counterpart are of course that he does get fired and becomes Venom, where in the comics Eddie worked for the Daily Globe and was fired because Spider-Man caught the real Sin Eater. Right after Eddie wrote an article revealing his identity, which turned out to be incorrect, which ended up being one of the things that ruined his life. While in the film, Eddie intentionally framed Spider-Man in order to tarnish his reputation after he broke his camera, and to get the staff job that he was trying to get throughout the film, but using one of Peter's old photos, causing Peter, who was influenced by the symbiote, to expose him and humiliate him in front of everyone, also ruining his life, which also does share some similarities with the 90s show's alien costume saga. Once again, Peter trying to attack Brock and Jameson directly firing him for lying. Later on, Eddie attempts to church to pray, causing the symbiote to find him and bond with him, which was of course taken from the source material too. There was also one point in the comics after he becomes Venom, he goes after Mary Jane. This was also done in the film except for the part where he teamed up with Sandman, and of course having her as a damsel in distress, which in the comics he just scared her. He's also immune to Peter's spider sense, like he always was in the comics, which the film implies that's also the case, being the reason as to why Peter wasn't able to react to his surprise attacks in the film's final battle. Later on in the movie, when Peter faces Venom alone, he remembers the symbiote's weakness, which was of course loud sounds. While in the comics he doesn't use that to win the fight, just made Venom use up his webbing because he was constantly using pieces of himself in order to generate it. He did use the exact same method in the animated series, by of course leading Venom to a shuttle launcher site to separate the symbiote from Eddie in order to get rid of it. The font of the message Venom writes to Spider-Man, which says "Spider-Man, stop us if you can," which was also used in some fonts of the comic cover and was also used as the font for the animated series too. When talking about other moments taken from the page, there was also a moment where Peter asked Mary Jane to marry him, but she later rejects the proposal, which the film also did, but for completely different reasons of course. Gwen Stacy also shows up in the trilogy and meets Peter Parker in university, where they are in the same class, which is also exactly like the comics. During the final battle of the film, Spider-Man and later Harry fights Venom and Sandman in the construction site, which might have been taken from the show Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, where Sandman would take advantage of that location in order to use the sand there to enlarge himself, like he does in the film, needing help from Iceman and Firestar in order to take him down. The Spectacular Spider-Man issue 200 were also inspiration for this film, especially when it comes to Harry's fate and of course his last action, saving Peter like he did in Spider-Man 3. Though of course the context and how he does so is different, as not only does he sacrifice himself in order to save Peter, but also early in the film he throws a pumpkin bomb at Sandman and knocks Venom out, while in the comics after his fight with Spider-Man he helps save MJ and his son Normie, as well as Peter from a building that was about to blow up. Harry in Spider-Man 3 was killed by Venom, of course sacrificing himself for Peter, while in the comics he died thanks to an experimental goblin serum, which later proved to be unsuccessful, taking a huge toll on his body, killing him. Despite those differences, Harry's death was also very similar to his comic counterpart, where Peter was with him in his final moments, and even having a similar type of exchange, where Harry still loves Peter and still saw him as his best friend in both the comic and the film. But there we have it for Spider-Man 3 and the comics that influenced its creation, which also concludes the iconic Sam Raimi trilogy. If there's anything I've missed, please let me know in the comments down below, and also please let me know your thoughts too. We'll be jumping into the first Amazing Spider-Man movie next week, so stay tuned for that. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter. If you enjoyed this video, please like, and want more, subscribe. To begin, Protocol 36.